Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's Sean from All Things EV, and I've got my buddy Gali from Hyperchange on the channel to talk about a few interesting topics. A couple of them that we're going to try and cover are the Model Y, Sandy Munro's teardown, as well as what's going on with Tesla in China. We think that there's some fundamental things there. So, Gali, man, good to see you. Good to chat with you. Welcome back to the channel.
Yeah, what's up, Sean? Thanks for having me.
For sure. How's everything in New York? You staying chill, staying healthy?
Staying chill, staying healthy. It's super windy right now, but yeah, staying healthy, surviving the quarantine.
Yes, yeah, there's some crazy stuff going on right now in New York. I'm sure you've been following Sandy Munro's teardown on his YouTube channel. I've been thinking in my head, like, he's officially a YouTuber now, which is funny because, you know, that's never really his intent, but I think over the last couple of weeks, he's got like 30,000 subscribers. So pretty impressive. What are some of your takeaways? Because he's posted several videos. I'm curious to get your insight into any of your high-level takeaways, and then we can sort of like drill down into some of the interesting pieces.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that he even has a channel and there's this much hysteria and buzz around what he's doing is almost like a sign of the times when there's so much fascination and hype around the Model Y and what Tesla's doing. Like, I think it's crazy that people are nerding out to this level. And I think that's one thing that gets overlooked is like a lot of the changes that Sandy Munro, tears down, and we get into like the heat pump, the Octave Valve, and the wiring system. Like, these are super cool innovations, but do they really matter to the consumer at the end of the day? No, not that much. Like, it doesn't really matter if you buy the car, whether it's one big part at the bottom or 70. But yet these are the type of innovations they're making. So if you nerd out on Tesla, I think it's been fascinating to watch, just like, even though the Model Y is this like kind of the same as the Model 3, just poofed out a little. They're talking about how much of the same parts they're going to share and how that makes production easier. Just to see like how they're continually innovating and still disrupting on that, I think is really impressive and goes to like Elon's favorite word, pace of innovation. That's been my biggest takeaways. Even though the Model Y is incremental, even though it only took a year to get off the ground, like they're still squeezing a lot of innovation into that manufacturing process.
What's your what did you find out about the Octave Valve? I saw you published a video, but I haven't watched it yet. What are some of your interesting insights there? Did you find any?
I think the coolest thing about the Octave Valve, I mean, I think it's not actually that big of a deal, but it's a part of the new heat pump system of the Model Y. And I'm a little out of my depth on this, but I think Elon has referred to some sort of printed on a circuit board PCB technique, very innovative sort of heat pump. And then part of that is this crazy valve system, which they've nicknamed the Octave Valve. And so this is the next generation system of the super bottle, which is what Tesla had in the Model 3. And the reason why it's so interesting to see all these heating and cooling systems is because as cars go electric, as we have bigger batteries that need cooling, bigger computers that need cooling because the cars are more autonomous, like there's just more and more stress on, the cooling system. And so it's really interesting to see Tesla innovate and put so much focus and engineering, resources in that direction.
Love it. And by the way, kids are at home, so they may come in and out here. Hopefully they're not fighting or ripping each other apart while I'm recording. Their mother would not be happy with that. Yeah, I mean, back to your point about will the end consumer see these innovations? They won't know that they exist, probably, unless they're deep into the Tesla culture. But I do think that some of these innovations that they've implemented into the Model Y will result in a better end experience for the users. For example, the heat pump and the Octave Valve should make things run more efficiently. It should equate to, especially in the wintertime, better range, better efficiency. And so I'm really curious to see what that looks like in the wintertime. We're sort of heading out of winter and into summer, but some of those innovations, I think, could be seen as in-user experience in a very positive way.
Yeah, actually, that's the one thing that does impact the user experience is that whole cold weather thing, because I don't personally own a Tesla, and I'm sure as someone who lives in Colorado, you can speak to this, but the cold weather range seems to be like, and this happens to all electric vehicles because they're spending so much energy heating the battery. And so when you talk about a no compromise electric vehicle, it's almost like these innovations that Tesla's making are the innovations you need to make to get it on par to ICE vehicles. And that's why I still think the biggest competition for Tesla is the internal combustion engine, not electric vehicles, because they're still making these improvements to be like, okay, the range of 300 miles still not quite as good as your ICE car, and it's really only 250 in the cold, but now it's actually 300 in the cold, and they're slightly bumping it up. So I think from that angle, it is really exciting to see Tesla like continually push that EV like frontier forward.
Yeah, I've talked a little bit about range parity with gasoline vehicles. I think that the industry, the EV industry, is sort of making strides to get to that, so that there is not as much of a jump between switching from a gasoline vehicle to an electric vehicle. At the moment, there is still a pretty significant distance between how far you can go on a single tank of gas from how far you can go on a single charge on an electric vehicle. I think that slowly is deteriorating, that distance or gap. One of the other pieces that you mentioned, which is range in cold weather. There is certainly some disparity between the impacts of cold weather on a gasoline vehicle versus the impacts on an EV. To me, at face value, and I haven't looked deep into the heat pump, and I'm really actually curious to see how what Sandy Munro has to say about it and how efficient it is. But to me, the heat pump is another positive step in that direction of removing that gap between winter driving in an ICE vehicle versus an electric vehicle. What are some of the other what are some of the other innovations that you've observed while watching some of Sandy Munro's videos? Are there any other takeaways that you saw?
I mean, I think the whole heat pump thing, and then there's this crazy casting machine that they. And I'm trying to be careful with what I say because we just recorded a Third Row podcast with Sandy, so that's going to come out and that'll have more details about this. But I think the big other part of it was like the casting. They use this big casting machine. Instead of, you actually went to Sandy Munro's office and took some amazing footage of the spot welds of the Model 3 that have become this topic of debate of like, why did you spot weld a million things together? And I think from, it worked fine for the consumer once again, but it was just a much easier and simpler way to build that from a manufacturing perspective, which is cast it in one part. So that's what they've done with the Model Y now. And so once again, it doesn't really matter to consumers, but from a manufacturing perspective, Tesla said they're spending 50% less per unit of output on CapEx for the Model Y, capital expenditures, investments in robots and vehicle building equipment and that kind of thing. So that's very, very impressive to me. That's almost an unheard of drop in, from one vehicle program to the next. And now it's interesting to see Sandy Munro tear it down. And we're like, okay, what 50% is just the number, but now we're starting to see what goes into that number. Is it the casting machine? Is it these other improvements? At a high level, the Model Y to me really seems like the perfect Tesla. Like it's a little bit bigger. It's the CUV thing that everyone wants. It still has the range. Like it has a bunch of space. It doesn't get cold in cold weather. Like it's like the size of the Model X, but way more affordable. Like it just feels like for a lot of people, this is like actually the Tesla that fits a ton of boxes. And even though from like a product lineup standpoint, it doesn't seem that innovative, from like a move the needle financial, just how many cars this is going to sell, how it's just going to totally dominate sales of the auto industry perspective, I've just been more and more convinced as we've sort of seen it come to fruition.
Here are some of the thoughts that I have about the innovations around this casting machine and reducing the number of parts on that back end that I think are interesting. And I would say that I do think that this, in a very indirect way, does have a lift on the consumer end with some of these innovations. One of them is because it requires less parts, it should take less time. The car should be less expensive to produce. If we're getting into the mind of Tesla and Elon Musk, I think that what we could see is a less expensive car to produce should result in it should result in a less expensive car for the end consumer, or a better product at the same price. Here's my thinking. Right now, the least expensive Model 3 is a standard range, and I haven't checked the range recently. I think it's somewhere around 220 miles of range. What I think could happen if they can implement these production techniques with their other vehicles, especially the Model 3, which Sandy Munro was critical of, especially in the rear area of the vehicle, I think that we could see a trickle down. And so maybe they do away with the standard range and the standard range offering, and then bring the standard range plus as that lowest price point, and continue to, at the top end, offer a bigger, better, just a better offering on the top end, higher expensive, higher range Model Y and Model 3. So I think the consumer will likely see some benefit in this as Tesla figures out this production process. To me, I think it's a really good way to continue to make it less expensive to produce. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, I think that there are some interesting things about how they're using some of the same parts from the Model 3 and carrying them over to the Model Y. One of the ones that really kind of struck me as interesting and sort of resourceful is they're using the same Model 3 seats in the Model Y, except they've just sort of put them on razors. I thought that was really interesting for the front seats. Same seats, they've just sort of put them on a platform so that it fits that SUV or compact SUV configuration. Were there any others that stood out to you that you thought, that's a really creative twist on resourcefulness?
That's a good example. I can't think of any exactly, other than like you look in the interior, it's like the exact same, I'm pretty sure. Like the touch screen, the console, the wheel, the buttons, like they've really standardized that part of the vehicle.
What was your takeaway on Sandy Munro's opinion of how they're going to configure the third row? He says that he thinks that it's going to be rear facing. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think the third row controversy is interesting because it feels like it's way too small to be practical unless you're like a really small kid. So I personally am not, like, I don't need a third row, and I don't even have a car, so I don't get this whole hype of like, is there a third row? Do we have enough seating? But I guess my take on it is that if there is a third row in the Model Y, it's gonna be really cramped. And I wouldn't want to sit there. But otherwise, you have huge cargo space. And Sandy Munro, one thing that I did like is he's super onto like how it's a flat cargo ramp, which I would have never thought about, but apparently that's something not all cars do, and it's good for like loading stuff. And then you see how big that trunk zone is. And I think there's some stat about the cubic storage going from like 15 feet to like 60 feet. I don't know if I have that right, but like the trunk volume storage is way bigger. Even though it might seem like 10% bigger from the outside.
The thing is with the third row, and we were both there at the event. I sat in the back. I sat in the second row, and I looked back in there, and I thought, there's no way two adults are going to sit back there. I think that this is how they're advertising that third row too, unless they've changed it recently. But it's going to be a really tough sell. I think it's a mistake that they're wording it as two adults back there, or 7 adults rather, I think is how they're wording that. For smaller people, smaller than average people, and certainly kids, I think that third row facing forward could work. It's going to be very cramped, but I really didn't think about a third row facing backwards, or the rear facing seats. But the way that they've configured that, and how it kind of sits down a little bit when you remove that shelf in the back, and then how deep that well is, that compartment is to put feet, to me that makes a little bit more sense. I think that that's pretty interesting. I could see that being a lot more of a plausible strategy, and maybe they called an audible there. You know, maybe they initially thought third row was going to be facing forward, and then they decided that in order to make this something that is feasible for normal people or a little bit larger people, maybe that is a strategy.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when thinking about Tesla's ride-sharing ambitions and the Tesla network, because in many ways, I don't know if Tesla or Elon has said this or not. I feel like Matt Joyce texted me about it, and it was like Model Y is the perfect ride-sharing vehicle. And I think that's true in a lot of ways because it's a little more roomy. And so I don't know if that's what they're taking into account too, but even just the cargo makes a big difference there. But if you think about the timeline of how Tesla's setting this up and how like Giga Berlin is going to just start with Model Y in about a year. China's coming out with Model Y in about a year. It seems like they're really designing this for like ride sharing utility as well.
This is a good transition to China, actually, since you mentioned it. With everything that's going on with the pandemic, the current pandemic, do you think that we we could see Tesla transition to really focusing, doubling, tripling, even quadrupling down on production and deliveries in China to continue to make sure that Tesla's meeting their annual goals for, I think, 500,000 vehicles?
Yeah, I mean, it's like a once in a lifetime sort of economic event. So I think it's very hard to like predict exactly how this is all going to unfold. Is the data accurate? Do they have another wave of shutdowns? Does Fremont really open on the May 4th? Do we reopen and then we have another shutdown in June? Or are we way overthinking everything and everything's going to get right back to normal in May? Like, there's just so much unknown that I think it's really hard for me to decide on like whether they'll hit their guidance. But this is something that like Tesla Daily's been talking about. And the Q1 numbers were incredible and signaled that Tesla's demand is like insane and off the charts globally before this, which is a really good sign. But now what's interesting is while this is shut down, we've seen these China data that came out yesterday, I think, like 10,000 cars delivered, unclear how many were shipped and exactly made, but like it just seems like that production rate in that factory, like for years, Tesla's had Fremont building 500,000 cars, and we fast forward 24 months, and they're going to have Shanghai Gigafactory also being able to build 500,000 cars a year. And that's something that this took 15 years for Tesla to do. This took like 2, So it's just, that puts into context this. And then you think about Tesla, you have these 2 huge car factories being geographically diverse. So as the Western world shuts down and China reopens, like Tesla sort of has a hedge to that. And the rising cash flow of Tesla Giga Shanghai is going to offset this stagnant, losses at Fremont. And so literally from today onward, Tesla's cash flow situation has already peaked on the negative side and is just improving no matter how long these U.S. operations stay shut down.
Yeah, I think the strategy does make a bit of sense. If it's the only factory open right now, it seems like it makes a ton of sense to really maybe even expedite some of the developments. Are they going to produce the Model Y along with the Model 3 in their current manufacturing facility in Shanghai? Or is this new development that they've got on the same property going to be something specific for Model Y? My understanding is they eventually want to get to battery cell production on site. So I guess yet to be determined, but this brings up a really interesting point about this is a video that I did about the importance of diversifying and making sure that you're not reliant upon one region for the core of your electric vehicles. Right now, a lot of batteries come out of Asia, whether that's China or Korea. They come out of Asia, and most automakers who are producing electric vehicles rely on those batteries. And so when you see a global pandemic disruption like what we're seeing, I think that what could potentially happen with some of these automakers that are a little bit more on the traditional side and relying on companies like Panasonic and LG Chem, they could see EV production drop pretty significantly. And to me, it builds a really strong case of the importance of what Tesla's doing right now, which is having a gigafactory where you produce the most important part of an electric vehicle on site where you actually produce the vehicles. This makes it a little bit more stable, I think, and less disruptive if you see something like what we've seen the last 3 months. Some of these traditional automakers are going to be really screwed because they can't get the batteries, or at least it was certainly disrupted when China was shut down. My guess is that they probably could not produce those electric vehicles in other regions or other continents. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's no question that this is going to delay every legacy automaker's EV plans, probably delay their supply chain way more than it's delayed Tesla's. And also on this Giga Shanghai thing, like you're saying, they want to build batteries there. Are they going to build the Model Y? Like, what's going on with all this? I think it's not even like, oh, they're phase 1, 150,000 cars. Phase 2, 500,000. I don't even think that's it. It's really Tesla China has launched. And this is like, they're going to do the semi-truck. Someone tweeting at me about that, and I was like, yeah, of course, Cybertruck, batteries, solar, like you name it. Like, I just think Tesla's creating a new division in China, and this Shanghai region or like factory, campus is just the starting hub. And like, it's good. What have we seen from Tesla China? They like every single deadline they crush. No matter what happens, they're always ahead of schedule. They always execute. They always deliver at an unbelievable, like, industry record-breaking pace. And I don't see that stopping. Like, so That's what really gets me excited. It's like I don't even think it's Model 3 and Model Y. I think that's just the start of, a very long sort of like 5 to 10 year long run of Tesla really entering this market.
What's your 2 cents on Cybertruck production? I think both you and I have done some videos on this. Does this take place in Texas? Is this a part of the strategy? Is there some lift and some benefit to moving Cybertruck production to the central portion of the U.S.?
Yeah, so if the stainless steel that the Cybertruck needs has a lot in common with whatever they're doing at SpaceX, then I think it makes sense to sort of like team up or get closer there. But it sounds like the Cybertruck with the whole exoskeleton thing is going to be a very different manufacturing method as a whole, and that's part, and just take a lot of space. So they want to do a new factory with that. I love the Texas idea because I think that's where trucks are, and it just would be a cool story. Austin is awesome, but
there's still quite a bit of room in Sparks, Nevada. As I understand it, they're not complete with the Gigafactory there. So why wouldn't they utilize that space that they've already intended to be developed for whatever? I mean, maybe you could say that they don't need what they planned on in regards to battery cell production because of whatever innovations that they've got, and hopefully hear about soon with this battery investor day. But why wouldn't they do it in a place that where they've got room in versus starting a whole new production facility in Texas?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And Elon has also said in the past that every Gigafactory would have its own battery production as well. And so that part of the reason that after he said that, I was like, well, of course they're going to start building cars at Gigafactory Nevada, the Cybertruck, the Semi. And it's been really interesting to see Tesla not do that, sort of slow the pace of expansion at Giga 1, but announce all these other factories. I think that has something to do with the relationship with Panasonic, but I don't know. That's really interesting and a head scratcher to me. Or it might have to do with the labor pool in Reno. They can't get enough good talent to really expand the way they want. But that, I don't know. That's a head scratcher to me. If it were up to me, and that's the first suggestion I would have brought up of where we should build a Cybertruck is like, well, why don't we just use Giga? Don't we have enough land there? Like it seems like they do. And
I think if I were to put a finger on it, I think it's the talent. I think it's the talent pool. I don't think that I think that they potentially realize that there's just not a lot of people willing to move to Sparks, Nevada. Not enough of an infrastructure. What you see with these other facilities, manufacturing facilities that Tesla's building, is that they've also managed to take a look at what universities and talent and culture is there to try and leverage that, both in Shanghai as well as Berlin. You've got this really great talent of tech and software engineers and mechanical engineers. And when you look at Austin, it is very, very fitting. It's my hometown, and I grew up there, and you've got some phenomenal engineering schools at the University of Texas, as well as cost of living is also another interesting one as well. I don't know if they would be producing battery cells there because I'm not sure the climate is really that friendly to it unless there's some sort of additional innovations. But to me, cost of living and talent pool in Austin makes a ton of sense if they want to produce a truck in truck country.
yeah, and it's funny that when we're talking about this, we've sort of forgotten about the semi truck. Maybe I'm getting off track, but like, that's supposed to launch this year too. And so I'm equally as curious before the Cybertruck. So I'm curious about where it seems like that has to be at Nevada, right? Or maybe a corner of Fremont.
So let's transition to one more topic here before we wrap up, which is S and X. Sales appear like they continue to be going down. So when we last spoke about this, you were of the opinion that Tesla's just moving away from more expensive cars and focusing on the broader market with 3 and Y. So do you still feel that way? Are S and X long in the tooth when you take a look at some of the innovations that we're seeing with Model Y in particular, but also Model 3?
Yeah, I think they're definitely becoming less and less important, but it's also what's happening is that Tesla's cannibalizing its own business by releasing cheaper versions of its technology. And so that's just kind of their game plan and their strategy. And so I think it's a little bit natural. And Elon Musk has seemed to say that he doesn't really care about the Model S and X because they don't move the needle on the mission. But then at the same time, they're working on this big Plaid upgrade, or that's what all the rumors are. So I think that the Plaid upgrade could be a way to reinvigorate demand of those. And then I think you need to do the horizontal screen. There's just lots of reasons why the S and X sort of feel a little bit older than the Model 3 and Y. And I think that has hurt Tesla, and they've sort of been in denial about it. But I think the Plaid refresh, which you and me were talking about like 2 years ago, getting hyped about, it seems like, is actually what's been needed the whole time, and it's just been getting staler and staler. But I think that refresh is indeed coming with Plaid, and that could like reinvigorate demand of that product line.
I still share this opinion that S and X are really great ways to introduce some of their most expensive, newest technology. So when we think about where batteries are at right now, I don't expect for Tesla to introduce Maxwell technology batteries in their least expensive vehicles. I think that it will probably be low volume production for batteries, and S and X seem to be the most appropriate place to introduce some of this most expensive technology until they can start producing this at a larger scale and get economies of scale. So I think that S and X still have their place. Plus, not everyone wants. Some people want a larger vehicle for whatever reason, because they have a big family, or because they haul a lot of stuff, or they feel safer in a car that's bigger. So I guess if we approach this with the understanding that it's not going to be high volume, but could be a really great place to introduce some of their most expensive technology, then it makes sense to keep S and X around still.
Yeah, there's a few lenses to look at this. I think the first is that Tesla's cannibalizing itself with the Model 3 and Y, cheaper versions of its technology. But then also another lens is, are the Model S and X outselling basically every other electric vehicle that's not a Tesla? Yes. So by that means, and even without in the ICE market share, like these cars are doing really well by all standards. They're luxury vehicles. If anything, they were punching above their weight because so many people just wanted a Tesla. Now they can buy a cheaper one. So I still think they're successful programs in their own right, but they're not moving the needle on the mission. I think they need the horizontal screen. There's no question that you and me were talking about the refresh for years because they feel stale. And I just think that's been leaching into the demand for those products. And I think the Plaid mode refresh could be what we need to like reinvigorate demand for them and like push us back over 100,000 units per year, super high margins. Tesla can make a bunch of money on it. So that could be exciting, but I don't know. I'm kind of hearing Elon on a couple conference calls ago talk about sunsetting those brands potentially, and like seem to really not care about them. I think that was some really interesting insight about how Tesla thinks about that.
Yeah, these are really interesting thoughts, and we'll probably know more once this Plaid Model S comes out, and I would assume that they would eventually roll it into Model X. So we'll just have to wait and see. Hopefully another, 6 months or something like that, and we should see, excuse me, and we should hear some more innovation around that for their most expensive vehicles. Gali, it's been really cool to catch up again. Really appreciate you taking the time to come on the channel, and people know where to find you, so we don't have to go through that again. But thanks for jumping on, and thanks everyone for tuning in as well to another Gali and Sean episode. Signing off because my kids are in the room and they're making lots of noise, so I'll talk with everyone later.